Hi, my name is Joan and welcome back to my channel. Today on this lovely Tuesday, May 14th, I was scrolling YouTube as I do, and I saw a post saying that the latest Roadhouse movie that came out on Prime Video about 2 months ago starring Jake Gyllenhaal had 80 million viewers and it has now garnered a sequel. And I thought this is the perfect time for my Roadhouse video because I have some thoughts and I'm going to explain why the new version of Roadhouse didn't work. Let's start with some backstory. Let's set the scene. When I was young, my father passed away, sadly, and my mom met a new man. His name is Gene. He's my stepfather now. He is truly amazing. And when I met him, I was in 5th grade. And so eventually my parents start dating and he moves into the house. What moves in with him is this big ass ton of DVDs. It's like this blue bin. I remember it vividly. It's this blue bin of DVDs that he had under the bed in the office room. Don't ask why we had a bed in the office room. It's very much giving like discount DVDs. I literally remember looking at this bin. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing because I love movies. But also the excitement died down a little when I actually took a look at the movies and they were strong C and D movies. Like kind of discount, but just like obviously not even like good mid-budget movies. There were 3 that stood out to me. The first one was Hard Rain starring Christian Slater. I looked at that DVD so many different times and I'm like, I'm gonna watch it. It was okay. The only thing memorable about that movie is Christian Slater. Like every time I see him in new stuff now, I just think of Hard Rain. There was another movie called Drop Zone that was starring Wesley Snipes and I was like, ooh, this was interesting. And you know what? It was interesting, just a little bit. Like the idea of a FBI agent that had to take up skydiving to stop like a package or something. Very 90s and very much in Wesley Snipes' heyday. And then the third movie was Roadhouse, starring Patrick Swayze. That was one of Gene's favorites and it became one of my favorites, and that was one that we watched a lot together. Mind you, I probably shouldn't have been watching that movie at the ripe age of like 12, but that's no here nor there. That movie just has a near and dear spot in our hearts together. It is one of my favorite comfort movies. And when I found out that they were doing a rebooted version with Jake Gyllenhaal starring as Dalton, I was excited. Like the trailer was enough to keep me in, and then I'm like, okay, like I can get behind this, okay? Then I decided to do a little double feature day where I watched both movies back to back, and it just falls very short of the original. The original Roadhouse was released in 1990 and it stars Patrick Swayze as Dalton. He is a cooler in the bouncer business of restaurants and bars, and he is the best of the best, top of his game. And he is approached by Tillman to help him get his Roadhouse in order. And Dalton is a very mysterious guy. He is very much a private man. He has a Mercedes that he drives from place to place, but every time he's in a new place, he gets a new car. And so when he's leaving, I think they start out in Kansas, he gives away his Mustang to a homeless man. He stops a fight and like, these people thought he was gonna, fight him. They're like, yeah, I always want to take you on. He was like, you're not worth my time. And so he ends up getting slashed, so he ends up sewing up his own injury. And he gets paid up front and he means business. He is a no bullshit kind of guy. And so he gets to Tillman's Roadhouse in this small town. I don't remember the name, but basically when he gets there, he kind of stakes out the place, sees what's going on, and it's a very rowdy place. Like it just seems like a lot of people just love to stir trouble in here. And there is a touring band and one of his friends in the band, so he actually knows this person. And one of the lines in the movie that I love the most is where people think that like he'll be bigger based off of these stories of Dalton. And he checks it out, and at first he does nothing. His first night he like does nothing. He just simply watches. And then he decides to take the job. He finds an apartment and he gets a new car, and then that's when he starts working with the employees. And while he's working with the employees, the second night really, he is just working, but he's still observing. He sits down with everyone and he's just like, these are the rules of the game. If you don't like it, then you can leave. And pretty much he sees that one worker is selling drugs on the side, so he kicks her out. A couple other people leave and they think that his rules are just too blasé. Like he's just like don't take anything personal, and, you know, be nice. You're the bouncers, I'm the cooler, I got your back, have each other's, and it should be good. And they're sitting there thinking, do you see the clientele that comes in here? Like, it's kind of crazy, but he's just like, nah, we got it. So then, as time goes on, you know, the workers are getting a cohesion together. They're getting better at defending themselves. They're good at kicking people out. And then one of the workers, I think his name is Pat, he actually has an uncle in town. His name is Brad Wesley. Unfortunately, Dalton kicks Pat to the curb because he sees that he's skimming off the top. And of course, as a business owner, this man's like, you better leave. But they're like, no, you're going to regret that. And he's like, okay, whatever. So then one night while he is, you know, working at the bar, Pat comes back with his friends and basically say, you're out of here, I'm not. And he's just like, okay, and get into a fight, precisely like proceeding to get their asses beat. But he does get cut up. So he goes to the hospital where he meets Elizabeth Clay. She is the doctor, and of course she's impressed by him because why was this man traveling with his whole medical record, like his whole medical history? And she's like, okay. And of course she's drawn in by his mysterious nature. And then she's like, what'd you go to school for? And he said, philosophy. And it's just, and you're like, what? Philosophy? But at the end of the day, it does kind of make sense actually that he went to school for that, because he seems to be very much a man backed by his morals and his principles. Then he figures out who Brad Wesley is. And so, you know, he starts to get acquainted with the town. There's Red, who owns a general shop, like not far from the Roadhouse. You know, there's a local dealership owner. I forget his name. But like, he starts to get acquainted with the town. And then the guy who owns the apartment he's staying in, I forget his name, but he's like an older man, he's a farmer. And so he figures out that Brad Wesley is, I guess, I don't want to say millionaire, but obviously like he's just an important figure in town, and like he pretty much like owns the town. And so they start coming up and start dealing with some trouble, and they start like messing with Dalton, and then it becomes personal because he's just like, I'm just doing a job. But then Brad Wesley's like, well, you're in my town and you're acting a mess and I don't like that. And so they keep going back and forth, and then the Roadhouse gets to a good point where they're able to renovate, their uniforms change, like it is a established place in the area. And so that's when Brad Wesley comes and has to assert his dominance. And then he has his right hand, Jimmy, who's kind of like Dalton but bad. Like they have similar vibes and, you know, similar skills. And there is a story in Dalton's past where he killed a man. And basically the reason why he killed this man was because he was having an affair with this man's wife, and it was either him or the husband, and he chose himself. And so this story kind of like follows him where he goes, and Jimmy taunts him with it. And, you know, Dalton has a good heart, and he wants to do best by the town, but it just seems like this Brad Wesley character is just getting at him because he, you know, stops selling liquor. He stops the liquor coming to Tillman's bar. So then there's that. He blows up Red's general store. He crashes into the dealership. Like, he does all these things. He even blew up his landlord's house. I can't remember his name, but doing all these things, and he's at his wit's end. And of course he thinks Elizabeth is with him, but she's like, you're a monster. And so she's like, fuck you. And he's just like, whatever, this town, fuck this town. And so Sam Elliott's character is like his mentor. Like, he learned everything from him, and he ends up coming like, you know, about halfway through the movie, and, you know, helps Dalton when it comes to the business. And he also just gives him advice. He meets Elizabeth. He meets Brad Wesley's, you know, Hort or whatever. And then Brad Wesley, of course, is being a little territorial and being mean. So at the end of the day, he was like, okay, so it's either you want Elizabeth to live or you want Sam Elliott to live. And he's just like, fuck you. I don't want to play your games. He's like, well, whatever. We're still going to play them. And It ended up being tails, and Sam Elliott's character dies. And this is when Dalton goes off the deep end, and he goes after Brad Wesley, and he kills all his cohorts. And at the very end, when he is about to get him, he decides not to kill Brad Wesley, but instead, all of the men of all the businesses that he destroyed, they kill him instead, which I think is a more cathartic ending, because it really shows that, like, he thought that he had a grip on the town, but the town was like, no, fuck you, right back. And so he ends up staying with Elizabeth Clay. I think they end up living in Brad Wesley's house, which I think is so funny. And it's Happily Ever After. That's the original Roadhouse, and I love it. It's amazing. It gets me every time. It's so good, okay? So now with the 2024 version of Roadhouse, it has Dalton. Instead of being a cooler in the restaurant business, he's actually an ex-UFC fighter, probably the best in the UFC, down on his luck, and he's approached by Frankie to help clean up her roadhouse in the Keys. Unfortunately, he's like, no, I don't really want to do that. I actually want to go kill myself. And while he goes to do that, he realizes that he doesn't want to die. So then he's like, you know what? I'm gonna go to the Keys and help this woman with her roadhouse, I guess. So he makes it to the Keys and he befriends Charlie. Charlie is the daughter of her dad, who was a book owner. And once he gets to the roadhouse, he sees the crowd that's getting a little crazy, and he decides to help out. Now, that is a mistake on his part, because the crew that he is fending off is actually the crew of Ben Brandt. He is a Nepo baby whose dad is in prison for, I want to say, embezzlement. But he doesn't know this yet. So basically, he goes to the hospital after he fends off this crew, where he meets Ella. Ella is a nurse, and she is Spanish, which is like, oh, okay. So they kind of have like a, flirt-ish kind of thing going on. So then it later is revealed that Ben Brandt sent those people because he knew that Dalton was coming to this roadhouse and he wanted him gone. And so he gave a special mission to Dell to kill him. So while Dalton is in his houseboat, Dell is there waiting for him, but Dalton got the upper hand, and Dell is left to his death being eaten by crocodiles. And the thing is that Dalton tried to save him, but he could not. So since Ben Brandt is doing an awful job of killing Dalton, his father, who's in prison, hires Knox, played by Conor McGregor. Okay? Ex-WWE Conor McGregor. And basically he has to kill Dalton because he's like, my son's stupid, he can't get it done. Now let me just say, I think his introduction scene was actually very, very, very funny, and how basically he gets caught with the woman who has a husband. He jumps out the window with nothing but shoes on. Like, this man is naked on the streets of Italy. He literally finds a suit jacket, just a jacket, throws it on, takes this call, and he's like, yeah, I'm on my way. That is some of the most chaotic shit I've ever seen. But for some reason, it made me laugh, and I'm like, I love it. I love this. So then Ben obviously sees Knox's appearance at this house, and he's like, who the fuck are you? He's like, well, your daddy hired me because you don't know how to kill people properly. And he's just like, no, get the fuck out of my way. And he said, I don't think you understand me. Your father hired me, so I'm here whether you like it or not. And so while that's happening, Dalton is getting a little bit closer with Ella. And when I mean a little closer, I mean they literally go on one date. Then he gets stopped by the sheriff, and the sheriff tells him to leave town. And you're like, what? Who the fuck is this man? But it turns out that Ella is the sheriff's daughter. And it turns out that the sheriff is into some shady business with the Brandt family. And basically, Ben Brandt is trying to buy the roadhouse to make a resort to make money that his father lost, obviously, when he got arrested. Now, this is a detail that Frankie did leave out. While this is all happening, the roadhouse is getting a little bit better, and they hired one new person. So a two-man team are taking out the trash, and it's fine, it's cool. They have a little moment, or whatever. And then of course Knox comes and he literally is steering trouble because he's like, Dalton, I want you. So they have a full out brawl in the Roadhouse, like full on brawl. They did not harm the band though. The band was playing and it was great, but Dalton is beat badly. And so once the revelation about the Roadhouse trying to be sold came up, he was like, bitch, I'm out of town. I'm gone. But Ben had a little plan of his own, and he got his little Jimmy dupe to go burn down the bookstore that Charlie and her dad owns. And then when he found that out, he was angry. He was very, very mad, and he wasn't really going to do anything. Well, he said he wasn't. But then instead of finding Ben, he finds the Jimmy Dupe character, and he just lets him drown. He basically like punches him in the throat. He falls into the pool, and then Dalton monologues, and he just lets this man drown. And I'm like, well, that's the end of that. And then basically you're just like, okay, so what's gonna happen now? Well, you know, we gotta have a kidnapping plot. So our boy Ben decides to kidnap Ella, and then that leaves Dalton having to work with the sheriff's department, i.e. her dad, to get her back. And so they're fighting on the boats, you know, they're doing the little tussle thing. And then Dalton is able to steal a boat with Ella and Ben on there, but it crashes into the Roadhouse. So now, sitting there, you're just like, okay, you know, they crash into the Roadhouse. And I know at some point Dalton and Conor McGregor does have a fight, and Conor McGregor is kind of taken out of commission for like a hot second. Well, he gets taken out of commission on the boat. He gets like dumped. And so Dalton and Ben kind of get into this little fight. Dalton's like down and out a little bit, but basically Ben is monologuing, and Conor McGregor character's like, bitch, you're fucking stupid, and he kills him. And I'm like, okay. So the final showdown was between Conor McGregor's character, Knox, and Dalton. And I'm like, okay. Obviously Dalton wins. I mean, by a narrow shot. Like, that fight was pretty close. And then Ella is saved. The sheriff told him, you ain't got no beef with me, but you gotta get out of here. Then he buys the book from Charlie, and then Dalton leaves, and then that's the end of the movie. So let's get into the issues I have. So I have my mighty list here of issues. Let's just start with the compare and contrast of the plot. In the original Roadhouse, it kind of makes sense that Dalton was a cooler in the business. Like, everyone knows who he is because, like, in that business that he works in, you know, if you're trying to stir up some trouble, they're like, well, we need a Dalton in here. But the fact that Dalton was just an ex-UFC person, like, he's not a bouncer or a bodyguard or a cooler. Like, why would you ask just some random UFC fighter to be your cooler? Like, that just makes no sense to me. And the fact that, like, Frankie as a business owner as a whole was just nowhere to be seen. Like, I saw Tillman way more in the original Roadhouse. Hell, there was a lot more business owners in that town versus this small town. Like, we barely saw Frankie, and we only saw Dalton interact with Charlie and her dad, the owner of the bookstore. That is it. That is the only thing we have seen. Like, I have not seen any other, you know, people that got bought up, you know, for this resort, or other business owners. Like, we didn't see that. And so I'm kind of like, okay. And then, like, for a movie that's about the Roadhouse, it really wasn't about the Roadhouse. Like, yes, the Roadhouse was trying to be sold for a resort, but it felt like such a red herring. Like, I'm like, where is the community, the camaraderie between the employees? Like, I don't know if I was really expecting like a beat for beat recreation, even though I don't think I would have been mad. I don't think I would have been mad about that, because you can elevate that. You can make like today's issues with those certain things with restaurants, like money and you know, like how many people you get, and like, you know, you can do the same things, but it's just kind of like, to me, like, that part just kind of fell short there was just no community. There was just no, like, they weren't all in the struggle together. Like, they were all frustrated. You know what I mean? And so, like, that was just disappointing. And then the actual character of Dalton was just flat to me. Like, Jake Gyllenhaal, his performance was fine. But I think what I liked about Patrick Swayze's Dalton was that he was a mysterious character. Like, a lot more things unfolded about him. Yeah, like, he had, like, that killing story that Dalton had in the original, but instead of his, like, he killed an opponent in the ring, and that's what got him all fucked up. Dalton's story was just a little bit better because, like, you didn't know that this woman was cheating on her husband, and you killed her husband, and then you find out that the woman you're fucking with, her ex-husband, is the main antagonist of the town. Like, that's not gonna make you fucked up. Like, you know, like, it all makes sense to me, because I'm just like, that makes sense. Like, of course that's gonna be a fear, you know? But for Dalton, it's like, what? You killed an opponent in the ring, and then you just stop fighting. Okay, so, like, you can't fight anymore, but then you're always fighting people in the Roadhouse just because. Unfortunately, Jake Gyllenhaal's Dalton falls in the case of the marvelization of the quick quip kind of character, and it just got annoying. It just got flat. And his relationship with Ella does not compare to Dalton and Elizabeth's relationship. Like, their relationship, like, congealed throughout the movie. Like, he met her at the hospital. She came to the Roadhouse. I'm talking about Elizabeth. In the original movie, like, this is how their love story goes. He goes to the hospital. She stitches him up. They flirt, right? Then she goes to his work, okay? And then she's there. And then they go out after it. And then she meets Sam Elliott. And then they go on an all-nighter. And then they hang around each other in town. They go out in town. They just do a whole bunch of shit together. But him and Ella literally meet at the hospital. Then they go on a date. And then she gets kidnapped. They don't even spend the night together. On this date, mind you, they were on there for probably like 15 minutes. It was not long. And so I'm just like, I don't really care about this relationship. I don't really care. And don't get me started on the villains. The villains of this story irks me the most. It's very much too many cooks. Too many cooks. Because, you know, in the original Roadhouse, you had Brad Wesley. He was the main antagonist. Yes, he had a whole bunch of cronies, but, you know, like, you can just tell they're not really pulling the strings, and they're dumb. They're dumb and stupid. And, like, same thing with Ben Brant's, right? But the thing is I don't like is that his father is an unseen character and brings in this, like, Knox character. And to me, that's just like the worst. Like, because it kind of undermines Ben's villain arc or presence, because he's the main antagonist, right? Kind of. And then you have his cronies, right? And then you have his little Jimmy side character, right? And you would think this Jimmy-esque character would be doing all this, like, freaky shit towards Dalton, and the one thing he did was burn that bookstore down, and Dalton killed him with the quickness. Like, when Dalton and Jimmy fought in the first movie, it was a fight to the death. Like, this man blew up this man's house and then rides off in the motorcycle cackling like a madman. Don't have to run to chase this man down, take him off the motorcycle, get into a fight, tussle for like 7 minutes, then he drowns him in the river, takes the body, and screams "fuck you" to Brad Wesley. Like, there's a whole arc in that. With Dalton and this Jimmy-like character, he literally punches him in the throat and he literally chokes and drowns in a pool while he monologues. This is supposed to be Ben's last form of defense. This is how I feel. Like, I know he had his other cronies, but like but Brad Wesley was scared without Jimmy. Like, without Jimmy, he's like, well, I'm fucked. Because he was. But with this Ben character, like, his Jimmy-ass character he was nothing. And then on top of that, in the final showdown, where it's Ben versus Dalton, apparently, we barely even get that. Ben's just like, well, I guess I'm gonna have to kill you myself. And he gets killed by Knox. And then it ends up being Knox versus Dalton. And then he kills Knox and that's it. And I'm like, I don't care about that. I don't care about that fight because there's nothing to it. Like it got very generic villainy at the end. And I did not like that. I did not like this movie's ending because I'm like, there is no purpose. Like, Frankie, yeah, didn't have to sell her roadhouse. And it's under construction now because they fucked that shit up. But there was no camaraderie. There was no, coming together as a community. None of that. And then the only thing is that Dalton got a moment with Charlie at the end. And then he left. And so, to me, in terms of action, I mean, the action wasn't bad. I felt like there was probably a little bit more action sequences in this film versus the 1990 version. But in terms of the plot, it was very much lacking. There's just too much going on and not enough at the same time. In terms of the main characters, Dalton was boring and flat, and Frankie was barely around, and Ben was an annoying villain that very much had the daddy issues. His heard but not seen dad was also annoying. Conor McGregor was probably the funniest thing out of this whole movie, and he's not an actor, but he acted his shit, okay? He said, this is my shit, and I said, I love that for you. I think the setting is pretty good. I love how it's set in the Keys. Like, I really enjoyed the setting. I thought that would make it more fun, but it wasn't. Like I said, the Roadhouse was not featured enough in this film. It wasn't. It was very much a red herring and a MacGuffin, and not used in the best way. And I left that movie feeling very disappointed. I gave it a 3 out of 5 on letterboxd. And then to hear that it's getting a sequel, good luck, Charlie. Like, that's the only thing I can say. Good luck, Charlie. Well, thank you so much for watching my video. This was a long one. I've been sitting on these thoughts for a little bit, but I saw that thing on YouTube and I'm like, I gotta film this because I need to get my thoughts out in the ether. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.